Thank you very much, Larry, and a very good afternoon to all our Pacific friends in the room today. Very excited to be a part of this panel. We have a distinguished climate expert panel in front of us, and I'm very delighted to introduce the team, which I will do very shortly. But I want to just open with a quick acknowledgement that in the panel today, we're addressing a pressing threat to global community, and one that transcends borders and demands collective action. Climate change presents, as we have heard in the opening statement from Prime Minister Mbuka and Secretary General Baron Wanga this morning, a threat to our security, but also our prosperity in the Blue Pacific continent. We already know this. In fact, climate change has become one of the hottest topics in the region. What we want to address in this panel is how are we addressing climate change differently? And just on saying this, I want to also acknowledge that despite climate change being a challenge to us in the Pacific, it has also given us the opportunity and the platform to build resilience, work in our various communities collaboratively to address the problem head on, but also embrace the impacts, the challenges, and see how we can step up to address these challenges. I want to introduce our panel this afternoon, Mr. Zephaniah Nawandra, Director General of the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, SPREP. Zephaniah previously worked with the UN Environment Program as the head of the Pacific Office, and before that held senior positions in the Fiji government's Environment and Culture departments. Sefa hails from Verata in Tailevu with maternal links to Taveuni, a very close neighbor to my maternal island of Rambi. We are privileged to have you, Sefa, with us this afternoon, and no doubt that your deep commitment to environmental protection and sustainable development will give us a big sense of inspiration, but also direction in our discussion this afternoon. I want to move on and introduce our second panelist, all the way from Vanuatu, Dr. Greg Nimtik, who started his career with the government of Tuvalu in 1998, having served in the public service for some time, initially as Deputy Director of the Comprehensive Reform Program, and then moved on to the Prime Minister's office as the Director General, where he led policy reforms to enhance Vanuatu's governance leadership. He is currently the Deputy Director of the MSG and contributes to the regional governance and development of the region. Welcome to you also, Dr. Greg. And last but not least, we have Salah Dr. George Carter, who is a Senior Research Fellow, Deputy Head of School at the Department of Pacific Affairs, and also Director of the Pacific Institute at ANU. Carter teaches, researches, and supervises climate change, security, and diplomacy, and also advises regional organizations on their climate work. I guess an experience that is influenced profoundly by his upbringing and background as a Samoan with connections to Tuvalu, Kiribati, Chinese heritage, and British, but also as a High Chief of Samoa, as Salah, the title of Salah, from the community of Leau Va'a. And I guess when you are a chief from your island, you have that duty not just to help your community, but the rest of the Pacific community. I will stop there. I know everyone is excited to get straight into our panel today. And just a quick note that this is a Talanoa format. We're advised that we will be operating under Chatham House rules. So the affiliation and identity of our speakers, our panelists, but anyone in the room as well will not be revealed. Without further ado, I want to open by setting the scene on the reality that the world is not on track in keeping the global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. And if the global system isn't delivering, how can the Pacific prepare itself? And I thought it would be useful for us to give the floor to DG Sefa to give us a sort of regional update. What has happened, where are we now, and how prepared is the Pacific against the climate risk?
Thank you, Aki. And just want to say I'm honored to be here to talk with you. It's not usual we get to talk to an audience like this, people who deal primarily with security. And I think it's something that we need to do more often so that we understand the different issues that we each need to deal with. Climate change, as you've heard, is the single largest existential issue for us in the Pacific. The reason why it is that it affects everything that we do. That's probably the first thing I want to stress. The integrated nature of climate change means that it needs to be addressed also in that way. So it cannot just be addressed by those of us who work in the environment area or in the resource management area. It cannot be addressed just by our envoys in New York, who are often the ones at the forefront of negotiations. It cannot be addressed by our leaders alone, because all of us need to be part of the solution. When we go to climate change conference of the parties, there's a very simple chorus that we tend to all congregate to, and that's 1.5 to stay alive. It's quite apparent now that 1.5 is not likely to be met. And the telling thing that happened at COP28 and COP27 was the acceptance of loss and damage as an issue formally setting up of the fund. Because in a way it signaled that we were going beyond adaptation and mitigation, that we needed to put in place concrete measures to address permanent loss and damage. The panel before this had a bit of a discussion about the impact on fisheries, tuna, and the economics of tuna. So it's that sort of loss and damage that we need to be able to not only argue at the international conferences, but to be able to make a case so that it can be considered and addressed. Neroni also in the last session asked, how do you get the US and China to follow these international agreements that they've all been obligated to contribute to? I think we need to continue to press in the various fora that we are able to have influence. So for those of us who work in foreign affairs and environment, in the climate change, that's at the COP. There's another one that Vanuatu has taken, and through the ICJ. The opinion by the Law of the Sea Tribunal, while only an opinion, it really brings back what we in the science and those who work in the technical areas fully understand, that you can't separate ocean and climate change. So that legal opinion brings back to the fore that it's an integrated issue. It's something that we all need to address. At SPREP, we try and coordinate amongst the regional organizations and also the NGOs and academia to be able to support our negotiators. Those that come from the capitals, the ministers, the political champions, and also those who are involved in the UN spaces in New York primarily, but there are also discussions happening in Geneva, the issues with trade. So all these different fora, we have to continue to press and have a clear message on what we want to convey regarding climate change and its impacts on the region. The other point that I wanted to make was that climate change is only one of the environmental issues that we face in the Pacific. Waste and pollution, the loss of biodiversity. These are things that allow us to cope with climate change if we manage properly. But because our ecosystems are under stress, we cannot provide the ecosystem services that natural systems usually provide, then our communities are not in a position to be able to adapt to climate change when it does become an issue for them. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now and elaborate more as needed later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG, for giving us an overview of where we are in terms of our progress on addressing the greatest threat confronting our region today. I wanted to move into the climate security project, which I understand is led by SPREP. Now, before we do that, I know that when we talk about climate security, and I look around the room, we've got climate experts, bureaucrats, law enforcers. How do we come to a nuanced definition of climate security? And maybe this is something that we can address as a panel, but I'll hand over to George to tell us a little bit about the climate security project that SPREP is leading, and how does that build on the strength of our regionalism approach.
Mo mon fatu lo fatalu fatu pa iwe mal faftai mo le ne no fa em fayen fa swat. Good afternoon. Yuma talo falava. Thank you very much, Pacific Security College. Sorry, almost slipped the A out. Aka and final panelists for this wonderful opportunity to share with you some of the work that academia. I want to sort of press here our role as academics, as researchers, as trainers that can support your work in this security community, just as what Sefania has mentioned, how we are involved in the climate community space. And part of that is this co-creation that we can work with not only regional but national governments, the civil society, private sector, to work on these regional challenges, these national challenges. I mean, I'll talk about the idea around security project training and the dialogues that we hope will come, and hopefully with the opportunity here to inform you that there is, a need, and also we do have the capacity and we need to build that capability to address climate security. But I rather also want to go back to what is climate security, because many of us here in the room don't really understand the way climate change impacts political and security systems. And to do that, can you put up your hand if you have some sort of climate training or understanding? Don't be shy. And that, as the cameras can see, it's not even 1/10 of the room. And that is very important, because we feel as academics, as trainers, and those who follow and see this research, it's very important also for the security community to have training and understanding of how climate change impacts have an effect on political systems and security systems. And for many of us here in the room, it's our concern on the national security rules. So that is what underlies much of the project and the way that we are looking in terms of this undefined definition of climate security in the Pacific. Because Sefa has mentioned, we hear it from our leaders at the UNFCCC in their speeches. We hear it in our leaders when they speak at the UN Security Council. In fact, it's the Pacific that pushes this agenda within UN Security Council, and we're very grateful that we have Ambassador Toiloma, or General Secretary Toiloma, here, who has been at the forefront of these international forums. We hear it from our regional declarations within the communiques and the speeches of our leaders, and we're starting to see climate security embedded in the pillars of our national security committees. But we have no action. We are doing very much little work. There's a lot of rhetoric at the moment. And we see it from the research side because we're not funded. We're not conducting that research. But what fuels the speeches of our leaders, this national security, and what people are saying in these international forums is the experience. That's what they're feeling on the ground. And what we're hoping to sort of bring together to fill in this, trying to understand climate impacts having an effect on our security systems, is to now put them in our case studies and implement them in our policies. Now, part of this, if you look at the sort of broader scale of what climate security is, one aspect of it, looks at military capabilities. That's one form of climate security. Climate security is also about what we see in Australia, the climate wars, the indifferences in opinion that stems out. But that's how climate change can be a trigger in terms of how changes the dialogue of a nation. And that's causes fragile instability in terms of states. But in many of our island communities, in our island states, a cyclone, a drought, or flooding, a change in the water temperature and ocean acidification has an impact, as we said in the Bold Declaration, not only in the well-being, not only in the livelihood, but also as a threat to security, not just community, but as a nation. The way that we respond to these. So yes, we are approaching these climate impacts in the work that we do in disaster management, but we need a coordinated approach in terms of how we bring that in terms of understanding our climate change. So in 2020, in the midst of COVID, we had an opportunity with SPRIP to really think about what is that climate security. And with the working with the Samoan government, we went inside national security committees and inside climate change to have that dialogue. And Boya was there first in terms of overlapping roles. There was a pure challenge there of not understanding whose responsibility it is. The overuse of police in terms of recovery, and that's not our work in climate change. We don't do that. Should we be looking for new areas, such as a Coast Guard? These were the dialogues that were happening. And they say we don't even get to have these dialogues. So part of these work that we're trying to promote, as well as training from, we hope to bring forth through the Pacific Security College, is this very essence that we hear all across. Some form of communication to lead into some form of coordination, to lead into terms of training and dialogue that we can actively say, this is what we're doing in climate security. But at the moment, as I said, part of it comes from that challenge. We're not doing something or not too much in terms of looking at climate security. Thank you.
Korapa, George, and thank you for giving us a snip of how the research and the work that you're doing with the SPREP is progressing. I wanted to move to Dr. Greg to give us a bit of an understanding how the region and individual countries and communities can best tackle climate change. What are some good examples? I mean, we've heard about the difficulty of piecing together an approach, a collaborative approach that involves a multi-stakeholder platform and approach to response to climate change. But share with us some of the stories and experiences from MSG. Dr. Greg.
Thank you, moderator, and good afternoon to everyone. So I can see your eyes. I can tell whether you are in the room or not. But thank you for this opportunity, and I also want to acknowledge everyone in the room. And also the fact that I'm not a climate change specialist, but I've been in this space for 24 years long. And I'm happy to share some of these experiences that I learned through my workplaces. Now, I think it's very important that we have to recognize that climate change respects no boundaries, yeah? And that calls you and I to work together as a team, regardless of where you're coming from or what region you come from. It is very important that we come together. So to answer the question of how best the region and individual countries or each organization can work together to address the climate change, I think one of the things that needs to be acknowledged and also work on is the fact that we need an effective communications among ourselves. Sharing information among ourselves is very important. and also collaborate together as a team. And that's very important. We usually encounter the fact that there is a different layers of mindsets in the room. And that's to address the issues of the climate change. It is very important that we all come in the same space and acknowledge that climate change has no respect to the boundary wherever you are. And also the term climate change may sometimes deceive us, but I like to label it this afternoon as natural security versus national security. And that's called for a change of a mindset, the change of the paradigm of how we do things. We've seen a lot of courses across the board, but nothing is done in the real world today as we do. Secondly, I think it's about time that we need to come and acknowledge that there is a need for us to set up a clear boundaries among ourselves, recognizing where our limit is. I think I have to say that at the regional space, I spent 24 years at the national level, and now moving into the regional space. And I realized that at the region, we have no land. We just operate in the space. Yeah? We have no land. We put our feet in the lands that belong to the national, at the national level. And we have the authorities that look after what is on the national levels. So that is very important. So whatever you design or you develop or whatever project you come up at the regional level, you have to bear in mind that for us at the regional level, we just operate in a space that requires us to put our feet on a land that we have no prerogative over it. And that is calls us for a need to respect our leaders and work together with our national authorities. Another thing is capacity building. At the regional levels, we have few key crop agencies that are mandated to pursue the agenda of the climate change and lead us at the regional level on climate issues. I think there is a need for us, rather than relying over heavily on the experience and consultants at the regional level or the crop agencies level, I think we need to shift our focus on how we can transfer that skills and build more capacity at the national levels. And that's very important. That will help us at the national levels to address the issues of the climate change in a better way. Let's move quickly. Let me move quickly to the experiences of sharing some experiences of what we have been doing at the MSG. And I wanted to begin by reading a quote, because that set a framework of how we see climate change from the MSG sub-regionalism perspective. Let me read a quote from the well-known pioneers of our regions, Mr. Bennett Nairobi. I'll read it in English. It says, I quote, "Many nations have the civilizations with its customs, values, knowledge, wisdom which have guided them through the ages. These are the revealed truth. Our history did not begin with the contact with the Western explorers. Our civilization did not start with the coming of the Christian mission. Because we have an ancient civilization, it is important for us to give proper dignity and place to our history. And that's what we see as a very important issues of the climate change, and that is culture, tradition, and our languages. During the consultations, when we did our submission for the IGJ, we traveled across the member counties and we had the stories. It's an emotional stories where people share about how the sea level rise wash out the graves of the ancestors. You know, how they have to evacuate the original land, the ancestral land, and move to another places. And these are all the issues that comes as a result of the impact of the climate change. So culture and traditions, even language, we never thought that it will be an issue of security. But today, as you look at it more carefully, it's an issue that you cannot walk or you cannot close your eyes on. Language is a very important security issue when you put it in the context of the climate change and national security. Let me quickly, before I finish, highlight a few initiatives that we at the Melanesian Spearhead Group level we did it as an initiative how we can tackle the impact of the climate change. So there is a framework we call MSC framework on the protections of traditional knowledge and expressions of culture. And what that framework does or focus on is how can we go back and revive our traditional ways, our cultural expressions, our languages that links to our ancestral land. How can we develop those social capitals to help us respond and mitigate better in our traditional ways, because that's the only existing resources that we have in our disposals. It doesn't require any foreign expert. It doesn't need money either. I can give you an example in the context of Vanuatu, where when we first category 5 cyclones, when it affected one province, the other provinces supplied the local foods to the other provinces. These are the traditional ways of how we can respond to the climate change more effectively without requiring an external foreign expert or resources outside to come and help us with. We also established humanitarian and emergency response coordination center. We call it EC. And we've seen the example. We have to acknowledge the Fiji military force during the Chudi and Kevin disaster when Vanuatu faced. They mobilized themselves to come and help during the disaster. And similarly in the Solomon Islands, we've seen the similar experiences. And these are some of the things that we can do within our own resources and how we can mobilize us together and work together as a team to help us in our regions. So in the interest of time, these are the few things that I want to highlight. I also have with me here what we call Unduan declarations on climate change by our leaders in 2023, last year. What this calls for is the recognition about how we can use culture, traditions, our language, and our Melanesian way to respond to our national security challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Greg, and thank you also to our panelists. I wanted to open with those 3 questions. What we did is just heard from the 3 panels on the 3 questions, but the next set of questions that I will ask will be addressed to all of you to respond to. But I think, Dr. Greg, you raised a lot of important issues about security affecting the region. And my next question is on climate-induced migration. And then we come back to these underpinning threats of displacement, loss of culture, loss of livelihood. How has climate-induced migration affected security to date? And how can we prepare for those issues in the future? And just a note to our team this afternoon that there will be an opportunity to open up to questions and conversations after, but I thought I pose this question first to the team, climate-induced migration and how we can prepare against this. Sefa, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just address this from my own standpoint as an environmental scientist, engineer. For me, the climate security in terms of a community or of a nation is the ability of a place to be able to continue to support the life in that place. Whether it's a physical induced impact that causes that not to be able to be the case anymore, or is it slow degradation of the environment that causes a place to be no longer fit for human habitation? Or is it an extreme event that comes in and causes widespread damage, as you find in some of the countries in the Pacific, a few cases here in Fiji, not only on the coast, also in the interior, where landslides and flooding can also bring about the same impact as rising sea levels or loss of coastal areas. So from that viewpoint, I guess the challenge for us who work in the environmental management, resource management area is how do we keep places in a condition that they're able to recover or they're able to be rehabilitated to be able to support communities to continue to live there. So that for us is the challenge that we face and how we address our work in terms of conservation measures, in terms of sustainable management, in terms of development control that can be regulated or have safeguards that people can voluntarily choose to follow. And then to have the contingency planning arrangements that you need to put in place in order to get them to adjust in case there are cases where there is loss and they need to adjust to a new place. So I take it from that angle. I don't pretend to look at it from a national security angle because that's not my area of expertise. But from our own environmental management angle, it's really looking at conserving what we have, looking at measures to where you can rehabilitate, and looking at measures of response and getting things back to what they were like, if that is possible.
Yes, thank you. I think there was a study done by the SPC and the World Fish and also the University of Hong Kong. They map out the residential coastal areas, and I think that study is very interesting in the sense that it helps us identify the populations that reside close. I think they look at 1 kilometer, 5 kilometer, and 10 kilometer. And the summary of the study is concluded by saying that there's 90% of the population, excluding Papua New Guinea, who lives within 1 and 5 kilometers away from the sea. And that's an alarming data, which tells us that in the future, as we are more facing cyclones and typhoons, climate mitigation and migrations will be a very important issues that we need to factor in our strategies and plan and look at how we can address some of those challenges now. And I find it very, very alarming in the sense that you're talking about 90 to 87% of our population who reside 1 kilometer at a residential coastal area. So that obviously will become a security issues in the future that we have to discuss how we can help them and mitigate some of the impact if there is a sea level rise will come and wash away the houses or the living houses, then we need to deal with that. So yeah, I think this is where that's one of the things that our national authorities and even at the regional levels, we need to start dialogue and working together on how we can put together some of the strategies and plan that we can mitigate some of the risks that may come out of that in the future.
Thank you, Aka. I'll frame my response to climate-induced migration in terms of developments. And I apologize, many of you are already working in this, who have worked on these projects or programs. But it's important that when you have a vast, as an educator, when you have a mini group in the people, it's also good to repeat so that others are also aware of the developments. Where this is one area, the Pacific, in terms of the leadership, in terms of campaign from grassroots to the top, in terms of policy, regional and national, is where the world can learn from the Pacific. And as someone in that space who looks at international politics, this is where Pacific countries, including Australia and New Zealand, have been active in that space. So one of which is the work of the Pacific Island Forum in the framework for climate migration, which was endorsed by leaders last year. And supporting that this document neatly creates a definition or the various definitions of various forms of climate migration from relocation, displacement. This is very important because it's the pathway to which something that countries like Tuvalu have been asking for is a UNGA resolution on climate migration. because the Pacific, if we are living in a world where these impacts on climate are going to get worse every 10 years, our land will be, we'll be losing out on much of our resources over the years. We need to set some form of frameworks or some form of way to address this as it gets worse and worse. And it's important that countries like from the Pacific, which and the region is working on, leads in that agenda. We can't let it be that agenda that's informed by what happens in Europe. We can't let it be informed by the context of which Africa is operating in. It has to be on the context in which the Pacific is operating under, and what we foresee are the next big challenges in the next 10, 20, 30 years, under a 1.5 or under the 2 degree, most likely in the next 5 years scenario. And so that's pertinent in parts and projects such as the framework on migration. I think it's also important that there was a recent project run under the UNDP on climate security, which focused on low coral atoll nation communities and the impact of climate in these communities. And it informed a lot of work in terms of risk indicators for nations. It also informed on a regional risk indicators. But let's take it for sure that research needs to be expanded. We haven't conducted a robust and all-region approach into what this region will look like in 10 years, in 20 years. Now, under the auspices of organizations like CSIRO and SPRIP, we have that climate data, but we need an interlay of social, political, economic context within those scenarios which we have been working on. And again, we haven't conducted that comprehensive work. And also this work on comprehensive. We are we have an opportunity of a region that's peaceful. And so the type of context that we are working on when we're working on these climate security is on systems that operate in, because the climate security that's defined from within the context of Africa, within the context of Middle East, is within a crisis, a conflict scenario. That's not the context that we have here. And so we have an opportunity to explore and expand that space to create what, not only regional, but what a global system that looks at not only fast and slow onset events in terms of climate impact, but the global system and how we should be addressing climate migration. But I think Sefa and Greg mentioned what happens internally, but that's the sort of development that we should also be proud of in terms of that work, but we need it to expand. Because that will always also sit what our leaders have been arguing for is that international agenda on climate migration.
Thank you very much, Salah, and I think you brought home for us the point that we need to work collaboratively in this space. And when we talk about climate-induced migration, it's something that's quite contentious in our regional discussions, because we want an approach that foregrounds remaining on land in our Pacific homes before we can look to the worst case scenario. But as we have heard from the panel, it's too important to be overlooked at this stage, and we need time to prepare and understand the science around this and align our policies, regulations, and collective approaches to responding to that threat. Panelists, I know a lot of discussion has been we have touched on a lot of crucial issues, and something that I have on the top of my mind is really seeing the benefits and trickle down to the communities, to the national government levels. And there's always the issue of money not being able to be accessed by our governments. And Sefa, you raised the point about the loss and damage, taking quite a while to get some political commitment, and then now having to raise funds and commitment to make sure that the funds are there for everyone to access. Now, we heard in the opening statement this morning by Secretary Wanga, the Pacific Climate Resilience Fund, I think it was, with the commitment to over $100 million. So trillions of dollars are spent globally on hard power security issues. How does the forum get countries to spend more on climate security? Here's my next question to you panelists. George, did you want to step up?
Yeah, this is a question that is always front and center in any of the COPs, financing and access to finance. It's quite clear that there is not enough financing available, and it's quite clear that access to finance continues to be problematic. There are different approaches that are starting to evolve in the region. One is to have dedicated regional funds that can be accessed by countries and communities outside what is available from global multilateral financing and bilateral financing. The other one is, I'm not sure how to call it, but the morphing of climate-related financing into development finance. I think that's another area where things are starting to evolve, where things like transition to technologies that are more friendly is built into normal development financing. The other issue that we continually need to work with is getting access to the financing that continues to come through the established funding mechanisms, the GCFs, the Adaptation Fund. And the challenge for the region comes with the limited capacity that we have in terms of regional accredited entities, in terms of the national accredited entities that are starting to be established in countries. I think there's a big role for the development banks in each of the countries. A few of the countries are starting to evolve into that, Fiji Development Bank, the Cook Islands. And because when you look at the nature of development banks, the role in terms of climate financing is something that is quite close to what they normally do. So they're much better suited than the finance ministries to fulfill that type of role. So this, I think, support to banks on how they can fulfill that role is something that needs to happen a bit more in our region. Just speaking from the perspective of a regional accredited entity for these financing mechanisms, when things are going well, it's not an issue. But when you have a project or program that runs into problems, then entities like SPREP and SPC can have an issue. Because when you become an accredited entity, you're basically the agent for that financing mechanism. But for an organization like SPREP and SPC, we're primarily the secretariat for our members. So there can be we had one project in Vanuatu where we did have an issue that we've been able to correct now. But it's all part of the learning that we need to do in order to help our countries to get access to finance. But it's an ongoing issue, ongoing challenge that needs to be addressed in multiple ways wherever we get the opportunity. Thank you.
My response to that is that we've seen a lot of investment and millions of dollars are spent on what we call hardcore security, yeah, or traditional security. But I mean, when we look at the climate change, it's like a chicken and egg story, yeah, to some of us. But I think the evidence proves that we can actually sequence it. Because when you look at the climate change affects everything. It doesn't have boundaries. And when you look at the burdens that the climate change impose on the national security, I think it's beyond our imaginations. And it's also impact on traditional way of changing the dynamics of how our security, our traditional securities operate in this space. I'll just give you an example. For example, the climate change, the weather patterns may affect the ability of our national security to respond. Or even, you just imagine you have a category 5 cyclones and destroy every infrastructure down. So I think to me, I think we need to change our mindset and recognize the fact that we need to put more investment in addressing the issue to do with the climate change. Otherwise, there is a need for us to throw the balance. But the way we see how the world operates now, there's more heavy investment, even within our regions, on hardcore securities, and nothing. While on the other hand, we cry for the money of the climate change to solve our climate issues. I think there is, to me, we need to reorganize our mind and relook at the climate change as one of the things that we cannot longer delay or further ignore in our regions. Thank you.
I have not a long response to this, because you could always say what we're currently using in terms of climate infrastructure, the funding that we're using in terms for climate adaptation, the funding that we're using in climate mitigation can also be seen as addressing climate insecurity. That existing funds that is there is also building, addressing the insecurities in terms of maritime, the insecurities in terms of food and water, the insecurities in terms of coastal development. So we can safely argue for that. But we can also say that in 2020 COP, I can no longer think of years, I only think of COP. At COP26, it's so hard to fundraise or mobilize $100 billion, the annual target that we need to have from countries. But when we went to war, I mean, we didn't go to war. When Ukrainian war came up, it only took 2 months to fundraise $107 billion to go to war. I mean, that's the type of urgency that we need for climate change, that 2 months that we mobilized that $107 billion. So I would rather say that when we're talking about climate finance for climate change, for climate security, it's the urgency. And that's where we need to think more reactive, be more proactive in terms of our thinking. Now, is it going to be, as everyone has saying, the industry, the private sector? I mean, we don't have a private sector, but is it the global private sector that can come towards not only in supporting the transition, but also meeting our insecurities through climate change? That's a question that our leaders, I know that national governments, it's an issue that many governments are carefully thinking of. In terms now, we've opened up carbon trading, through now that's been operationalized. It's something that's high on some countries' agenda, and something we also need to start thinking of. Could this also fund the climate security agenda, which the nations or as the region would look towards? But I'm not I'm not a finance investor to sort of give a good advice on how we can get extra funding.
And I just want to ask a quick question around this discussion about money coming into the region to support our response to climate change. And I was thinking, how do we tailor, because we're asking a question here about how the forum can approach, increasing financing. But this financing usually come in with a set of conditions from the development partners or from the financiers themselves. How do we tailor that the work or activities that we implement out of these funds are the ones generated from the Pacific or led by the Pacific community? Can I ask that question to you panelists before I go to my final 2 questions, and then we'll open the floor for discussion.
Okay. I think I touched on this earlier in that the reason why the region has, through the forum, has pushed for the regional resilience facility is because we wanted to have better control of how financing is accessed and what criteria is used for deciding how the funding is utilized and making it easier to access. And that's one way to approach it. The other one is with the existing global funds, I think we shouldn't discount the role that the governance bodies of those facilities and how it influences how funds are disbursed. I'm saying that looking at Feturi as a past board member and how of the GCF and how having somebody to speak and articulate what we face in small island developing states in that kind of governing body of a financing mechanism is something that we really should continue to push for. Because as George was saying earlier, what we face is quite different from what other regions and places face. And unless we have, if it's not us, then it's others who are able to articulate it on our behalf. I know in the recent past, we've been able to work with other countries who have been on the board to articulate things for us when we don't have representation. Because it's linked directly to the convention, but just the way that the governance is set up, sometimes it's a bit away from what the convention intends the financing to be used for. So I think encouraging our governments to be active in those governing bodies when the rotation comes around is something that we need to commit to.
One of the things that we have within the UN negotiations in terms of the agenda around finance, and one of the key issues that we always argue from the Pacific that's pulled up by AOSIS is the term of simplified access modality. And that simplified access, we go a long way. That's not just a simplified access for our governments, but it's a simplified access for communities. The existing UNFCCC climate finance mechanism does not allow a village to go directly to UNF, to the Adaptation Fund or GCF to have that form of, seek funding in terms of its adaptation or mitigation projects. And that's something that we hear over and over, and that's what our leaders have been saying. Our communities are not doing that. I mean, fortunately, now we have the infrastructure facility, the Pacific facility, administered through here by Pacific Island Forum, and as we heard this morning, has collected that 100 million. That addresses this. But that $100 million is not enough. When we've seen from the ADB and the World Bank reports that we need at least $4 billion for the next 5 years to meet the challenges of the region. $100 million is enough. So it's not enough. And so there's much more that we need to look more in terms of that simplified access. Because it's not just our governments that are responding. As we've heard in the various different panels, it's our women community groups, it's our village groups. They are the ones who are on the front lines in terms of response. They are the ones who are working. It's not just the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. It's not just the Red Cross that's working on climate change projects or initiatives. It's the church groups. And they also need to have this access. And that's a challenge, not only for the negotiators, but a challenge also for us within the systems to create that system. So that when the funding opens up, like what's happening with loss and damage, the reason why we can't bring it outside of the World Bank and create a new system is because we don't have a system of governance that can come towards absorbing, that we don't have the capacity in terms of bringing, but also reporting it back. So there's also a challenge there in that space in terms of if we're asking for modality, we need to create that modality. And that modality needs to be moves with the pace in which these funds have been created. Because right now we have the loss and damage, but very soon you'll have other, initiatives that want to go up. Even a climate security global fund, or maybe it's going to be a climate gender global fund. There are these initiatives that countries are trying to push for, but we will never have access to these funds directly if we don't establish the Pacific regional modality and the national modalities that can absorb these international funding mechanisms. But it's not directed to climate security, but towards what we can do in that space.
Thank you very much. I'm very conscious of the time that we have left, and I'm supposed to be opening the floor for questions, but a very quick last question on what a just transition looks like for the Pacific fossil-free future, and how can we factor that into our national security strategies. A one-sentence response from the three of you, and then I will open up to the audience. What does a just transition look like, and how can we factor that in the security outcomes document?
It's a hard question, isn't it? Thank you. I think for me, in one sentence, is that there's a lot that we've said about the climate change, the impact, and how we can mobilize the resources. I think it's very important that we seize the opportunity and rewrite our narratives of how challenges in the Pacific regions. One of the challenges is that our narrative is more reflecting the global languages. But if we rewrite our narratives of our challenges in the region and see how we can mobilize our existing resources and help ourselves, like I've said, our key issues that we need to focus on is our culture and tradition and our biodiversity within our regions. Thank you.
Again, maybe I just pick on the peculiarities of our region. We're a maritime region. I think the usual transition, renewable energy, and all that will be looked after by what is happening globally. But for us in the region, one of the biggest issues is sustainable shipping. And the work currently being done led by Marshall Islands and Vanuatu, especially through the IMO, I think is something that will help us in future if it eventuates.
I'm very glad our two panelists have already said the more intelligent response. I mean, just transition is about the energy transition. It's about how we look at our labor, how we create jobs out of the climate transition. But I think it's a very simple answer, so it involves security as well. I mean, we can't think like it's just an economic issue. It's also a fundamental security issue. It's about national security, about regional security. And people in this very room need to be in that conversation as it's happening live, as right now, not only in the Pacific, but globally. We need to can't rest that our region will be forever peaceful. We can't always think within that space, because how we argue in climate change, the impacts are going to get worse, the situation are going to worse, exacerbates existing. So we need to be ready for those responses as they come, but not be reacting in that space. So it involves security. Yeah.
Three very intelligent responses to the question. Thank you very much, panelists. I'm going to open the floor now for questions. And Larry's got the mic. Please put your hand up and identify yourself before you ask your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Perez. I'm from Guam Customs. I'm not sure if I'm asking the right question, but I decided if I ask, other people might be understanding the same way I do. So I had to write it down. So how does man-made climate change, like the situation in Dubai with cloud seeding, impact the response to climate change and national security for any one of the panel members?
Can we please ask you to repeat the question?
Just remain seated, it's fine.
how does man-made climate change, like the situation in Dubai with cloud seeding, impact our response to climate change and national security?
Panelists, are you comfortable addressing that question? Oh, why don't we take two more questions and then we respond?
Yeah, Tarofa. My name is Faturi. I'm with Moasai Commission here in Fiji. Just a reflection. I think science is important to make informed decisions in the context of climate change. But my own conclusion is that at the end of the day, climate change is a political issue. All it takes is a change of administration. And if they don't believe there is such a thing as climate change, that will also reflect on their contributions to some of these funds. So the moral of the story is there are 18 members of the forum. We are here to look for solutions. Let's be novel. We have, I think there was reference to the fact that we have 21 forum dialogue partners. There was reference also to the Pacific Regional Resilience Facility. Can we do something similar for like an adaptation fund? That way it's tailor-made to our own, I think there was reference to peculiarities and to our own unique, because we will be forever competing with some of the resourced developing countries for the same funds that will be sent to GCF or GF for that matter, or even the adaptation fund. So I think that will be a legacy for these 2 or 3 days. Let's ask our development partners. Let's ask our dialogue forum partners. If you are genuine and if you really want to help us, let's look for a Pacific solution to a Pacific challenge for AFTAC.
Can we take one last question and we'll go to a second round of Q&A, but we want to allow our panelists to process and respond.
Yeah, sorry, it's Alipati from Fiji. Just perhaps just a general question. You know, there's maybe the forum, the panelists will know, there's a South-Pacific Defense Ministers dialogue that happens annually. So in 2019, they came up with a study commissioned by the French military on climate change and security. There were some very good recommendations on that report. I'm just wondering, because when you talk about national security, you also have to think about the role of the military in, I think George touched on it a little bit, capability. There are some things that we can do while we await these big, whatever things to happen. There are some things that we can do, and we should think about using whatever, for those of us who have manpower, think about engaging with our development partners to help us in this. I think these are some tangible things we can do while the powers that be discuss all of these bigger issues. Because I just give an example for here from Fiji. Our military, they basically deal with either peace and stability or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. We admit the fact that we don't have airlift capability, nor do we have like the platforms that Australia and New Zealand have. But in partnership with them, we can do things, tangible things that help our communities. While we wait for these other bigger things, we also work with them in terms of, like James was saying, policing our maritime domains. These are things, practical things we can do while the bigger things are being discussed. So that's just what I wanted to ask, whether you've considered some of the other security organizations like that are not here, South Pacific Defense Ministers, that have a role on this topic. Thanks.
Okay, I'll give it to the panel to respond to those first 3 questions.
Thank you. I'll start with the last one. I think what you're talking about is contingency planning arrangements. We do have something like that that SPREP looks after for oil spill response, where we have arrangements with US Coast Guard, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority in New Zealand, and the French Navy. So those things that can be done, but it's up to the people who work in that space to make that happen. In terms of regional responsibility, it'll probably be the Forum Secretariat who looks after that. The Feturi's was more a comment than a question, and I guess it's something that we all need to continue to push for, because the more we are able to set up our own regional mechanisms to address our regional issues, the better it is for us, and try and attract financing and partners to come and work with us. And it's not only in financial or funding mechanisms. It can be strategic projects. And I make the example of Weather Ready Pacific, which is a strategic program that the Met directors have put in place, and then they look for funding. And they're starting out on that journey now. So it's something we need to grow ourselves and then go out and shop for partners and donors who want to work with us. The last one by Guam I didn't quite get, but I think it's differentiating between human-induced and natural. I guess when climate change impact happens, it happens. You have to address the impact as it hits you. You won't be trying to assess whether it's human-induced or unless you're looking for compensation or you're trying to allocate that loss that you've experienced to some entity or someone to pay. So I'm sorry I didn't quite get the question. Thank you.
I can expand on that. In fact, the question was on cloud seeding and how this technology can impact on national security. I mean, cloud seeding is used in places like China and UAE, which is particular chemicals put in the cloud to increase water perspiration. I mean, it's a national security when too much rainfall and the infrastructure in some of these places can disallow for drainage. So you have flooding. And that's imposed by countries on themselves, but it's a technology used to increase water for agriculture. But there may be homes or communities around these agriculture places that, are not, they've been in desert homes and they're prone to, such, changes, rapid change to the weather system, causes flooding. And that's the sort of national security impact that it has. I guess let's not talk about the Pacific, but of course, climate such as rain can move transboundary, and there's an impact if the climate weather system moves to a different country transboundary location. That's another area. I'm very grateful for the mentorship and the work of Ambassador Elisaya in a lot of the work that we do. I do take, yes, absolutely, it's political, but also the work while following Pacific negotiators in UNFCCC negotiations, the work in regional organizations, the work within UN agencies on climate change. I can also say that climate change is also very bureaucratic, that the way in which bureaucracies or public servants can try to institutionalize momentum as it moves can also try and reflect back or be prone to political change. We come to these negotiations, I'm talking to US negotiators, we're talking to French negotiators. We can go as far as this because this is as much as I can go and lock it in so that the next government that comes through, they're not able to change, right? So there's also maneuvering that bureaucrats try to do in this small world of technical negotiators, because we all see the same value that we are trying to protect the world, our countries from this, but we also have political masters that can change. And so I would also argue that's bureaucratic in a way that's trying to lock very small incremental move forwards in our small room negotiations. And we try to lock that, take it back, and although it may not be legislative, but we can turn it into policy, or even say a COP31, and if another government comes through and says we can't do it, we've locked it in. So that's the type of bureaucratic changes that people in this room can also make in these spaces of climate change.
Thank you very much, panel, and thank you also to our audience. I have to end here. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our panel, but just a very quick sum up, and I know Dave will do another sum up after this, but some of the themes that come out and key takeaways for me and the panel this afternoon is that we're not on track to keeping our global temperature within 1.5 degrees Celsius. What does this mean in terms of impacts on the ground? Requires a collaborative regional approach. There is need to strengthen governance and leadership around accessing financing and safeguarding our culture, tradition, and knowledge. I want to thank the panelists this afternoon. Thank you very much for taking time to share with us your wisdom, your expertise on climate change. And I also want to thank a very well-behaved audience this afternoon. And there'll be an opportunity to ask the panelists further questions outside of a cover over dinner tonight. Thank you so much, everyone.